Hi, folks. We're live. Welcome to Beyond the Board. I have with me Nate Lusher, who is a recently minted PKT. So I'm going to throw
That's
that
true.
out first. Yeah. And Nate and I actually worked together on for a decent amount of time on a transformation, which is kind of what we will be talking about today, which
Yeah.
is Nate is brought. Nate, if you could add a little more about yourself, please.
Sure. My name's Nate Lusher. I spent the last 25-ish years in product and engineering. Was a developer for a while, agile coach, scrum master, those sorts of things. Did some consulting. My current role, I'm director of product operations and chief of staff to the chief product officer for a healthcare IT company. And yeah, that's where Pratik and I worked on some operating model things that we'll talk about today.
Yeah, let's get straight into it. Let's get
All right, let's do it.
let's yeah. So tell us a bit about the team, the organization, and more importantly, like what were the challenges you were facing before you went through this Kanban implementation or this flow
Yeah, sure.
implementation? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So the organization as a whole, what the situation we found ourselves in is there were actually a number of organizations that had come together that had a host of different products that were interconnected, but each of the groups worked completely differently. Sometimes polar opposite kind of value systems and ways of working in terms of the way they thought about tracking their work and breaking down their work and doing their work. And we realized that the power of them coming together was being able to work together, but that we had a lot of work to be able to actually do that in real life. And so some of the challenges that we end up seeing is like you want to be able to manage the portfolio of all those products across, but when they're all working differently and all like visualizing work differently and thinking about work differently, you have no visibility into what's going on. You don't know where you're expending work. You don't know how much work you're doing. You don't know how to steer the ship. And so we needed to address those problems if we were going to realize the benefit of these orgs being together. And then the other thing we were noticing is just product and engineering, because they were also so different that it was hard for them to partner together really well, to know what the other was doing, and to be able to cooperate in a way that delivered value really fast. So that's what we're kind of staring at is like, how do you address this problem? So,
Yeah, so like it's almost like a scale of scales. It's all different
scale of
organizations that were
scales.
already scaled coming
Already,
together.
yes,
Yeah,
already large organizations. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. So definitely a scaling problem, right?
yeah.
Yeah. So it's an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's especially the scope of this.
Yeah.
What considering that scope, considering these different ways of working, what made you think of Kanban as the way to go, or was there something specific that specific pain point, or what made you decide to go towards Kanban with this?
Yeah. It's interesting. There's a lot of different ways to go. In a scaled situation, probably the most common thing would be like safe or something like
Mhm.
that. But what we were looking for was something, for one, that was pretty light, that allowed a lot of our teams to continue working in some ways that really worked for them, while giving us the ability to manage the portfolio. And we also wanted to manage the work more broadly than just the engineering work. Like we wanted to be able to visualize it from the beginning of an idea through discovery and all that kind of stuff, all the way to a customer's hands. Um, and we also we really wanted something that was based in flow principles, just because we think flow principles and agile principles, systems thinking, we wanted something that blended those together because that was going to be enduring for us. We didn't want to get caught up in a specific framework. And so I think, as you know, we actually didn't even call it Kanban. We just kind of called it flow, and went from there. And so, yeah, it seemed like a no-brainer really, because by focusing just on flow principles and some core aspects of Kanban and the metrics, we could apply that to all the teams without them needing to really do much. Because we could set up the portfolio as a flow-based system and let the teams continue using Scrum or Kanban or Scrumban or whatever else they wanted to do. And a lot of times there were real reasons why they were organized the way they did. And so Kanban was just kind of a natural fit, I think, for the way we wanted to manage our work.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I'm a fan of this, so obviously my bias will show through.
Yeah,
But it is interesting that you were talking about this huge scale thing. We're
yeah,
talking about a very complex environment,
Mhm.
And your decision was, hey, let's put the simplest thing. We
Yeah,
need to call it Kanban. Let's put the simplest
right.
thing on this, so that there is so that we can at least get started and figure out where we need to go.
Yeah, I think so. And the last thing you want to do with a large portfolio is slow people down with a lot of heavy process, right?
Mhm.
And so we really felt like Kanban gives you the flexibility to make it that you can get results without a lot of heavy process. So yeah, that was a good choice for us, I think.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm glad you started with you use the
Yeah.
S word up front to
Yes.
say
Yeah.
we could have done that, but we didn't do that.
Yeah. Lots
Again,
of reasons. We won't get into those, but
yeah, again, that's
yeah,
just my bias showing through.
yeah.
So how did you go about getting started with Kanban? Like, how did what uh, and you mentioned something else that was interesting, which was
Yeah.
you've got multiple teams working different ways. How did
Mhm.
you adapt that whole thing to fit your context?
Yeah, well, I think, and I gave you a plug before we started that I had a multimedia event I wanted to bring
Yes.
into
Oh,
the
I'm so excited for
conversation. It'll
this.
help explain this. I think actually this probably just shows my desire to go back to like whiteboards and workshops and things like that. But yeah, so I drew this out. It is hard. When you're talking about like 50 teams, right, and a bunch of different work, it's hard to describe in words like what did we do? But I'll do my best. I've drawn it out here in stick figures. So we'll start with this. So hopefully you can read
Mhm,
that
mhm.
if I can get it oriented correctly. So we started with everything changed. We started
There we
with
go.
roughly 50 cross-functional teams. This is kind of where we started. And we basically said each team need 1 to 8 team members. It's pretty common, agile sort of scrum-sized teams.
Mhm,
Probably the bit that's maybe a little different that we wanted to organize our people around is we added what we call two in a box. It meant we had one product and one engineering leader assigned to each team that was helping be accountable for the work that flowed through that team. And so what we decided first in this whole thing was rather than jump into like process, it was like we got to organize our people in some similar ways. And we started with let's organize them into teams. They were mostly already organized this way, but we kind of formalized the roles. So that's kind of how we started. And then um, the next layer up is where it got interesting. It's like you have 50 teams. Um, and if you've dealt with teams at that scale, you have that many different teams with different backlogs. There's no chance they're all working on the highest value work. And it's almost impossible to organize them all. It's just too many different things. And the teams become really highly specialized a lot of times in a narrow set of things. And to realize the benefit of scale, we needed to find a way to group them together, to give them a larger set of work to work on and give them some agency in it, while not necessarily throwing, like, not every team can work on everything, right? Like in a portfolio of this size, multiple tech stacks, multiple domains, multiple customers. So everybody can't do everything. And so we decided to create what we called suite areas. So I'll hold this up. Suite areas. Suite areas were our way to say we'll take 1 to 8 teams and we'll put them together and let them work on essentially one backlog of work together. And we came up with about 15 of these as we went through the organization. And again, actually up here, you'll see we also at the suite area level had two in a box model. So a product and a tech leader accountable for the suite area together. And so this was one of the missing pieces, I think, in the way we wanted to scale. And it's probably been the hardest concept as well to get across to people, but suite areas were how we grouped them together. And then we grouped suite areas into suites. This is hard. And again, for the suites, you end up with a number of suite areas inside of each suite. We had about 4 suites. And again, we had a two in a box model at the suite level. So you had a product leader and a tech leader at the suite level as well. And so we organized our people first. We organized them in teams, which fit into suite areas, which fit into suites. And so organizing the people was the first step. And then organizing the work was the second step. I promise I don't have too many more slides, quote unquote slides.
Slides.
I know, right? And so trying to make some sense here of like, you have to figure out how you're going to break down the work. And we decided we needed to break down work in a more similar than different way. And so at the portfolio levels, like above the suites, we decided to use something we call headlines. Headlines need to be less than a quarter and generally require coordination across multiple suites. We had initiatives, which had to be less than a quarter and that generally required coordination across multiple suite areas. And then we had epics that were less than a month in size, that generally were managed, were spread across multiple teams. And then teams managed a list of stories that should be less than 2 weeks. So that was kind of like our right sizing guidelines. And so this is approximately what it would look like. So at each of these levels, you would have a backlog of work managed by a product person that then would help to figure out, break down the work and understand the work and just pipe it through the different phases of work, which is my last slide. So these are the phases of the work that we landed on for everything Epic and above. So across all of our suites, all of our suite areas, we decided to use these phases of work: new, discovery, analyzing, implementing, releasing, and done. And a couple of things just to point out here that might be worth saying. At the story level, we let teams use whatever they want to do. So they do their own boards, their own processes, and that's totally fine. But at the Epic and above, we use these. And one thing that we did in expanding the scope to include more than just engineering is we added this discovery idea. This is true product discovery. We wanted to call it out as a thing that we wanted to make sure we did in our workflow and call it out as a specific piece. Probably in the next evolution of this, discovery is more like a dual track thing than a phase. But this is a way to just get our first kind of like feet in the water, toes in the water, if you will, in terms of like, let's do discovery as part of our normal work. So that's kind of the system. We called it as a whole, we called it the product operating model.
Yeah, and Nate, I'm going to ask you to put up your last two slides up again,
All right.
if you could, please.
Right. I don't know if they'll fit at the same time. Let's see.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. So, I'm gonna put words in your
Which
mouth.
one do you want to look at? All right.
I'm gonna put words in your mouth,
it.
and you tell me if I'm saying this incorrectly.
All right.
The last slide that you showed before this was was essentially the Kanban board for everything Epic and above. So
everything Epic and above. Yeah.
Epic would have a Kanban board that is these statuses. Then initiatives will have their own Kanban board. These statuses.
That's right.
Headlines will have their own Kanban board.
Their own board. Yep, that's right.
Based on that second to the last slide, at the team level, the teams were worried about stories and managing those on their own Kanban boards, and they could, or Scrum boards, and they could set them up however they wanted.
That's right.
But the suite area would come together to manage these epics.
That's right.
And observe those epics moving through the Kanban board.
That's right. Yep. Yeah. So yeah, it's like almost a matrix, right? Of like, so a suite area would have a board. And so you have 15 of those boards. You have 15 suite areas, you have 15 suite area boards. And yeah, the leaders, the team leaders, so like the 2 in a boxes of each of the teams would probably participate in the management of that board at the suite area level, because that's where they're going to pull their work from, right? So like the team leads are going to participate with the suite area leaders and look at their suite area Kanban board, which would include epics and maybe initiatives. And they're going to be figuring out like, how do we take on pieces and parts of this, and each of the teams cooperate to get this done. And by using the Kanban approach, you like narrow the focus, right? To you keep work in progress narrow, so all the teams are working on the same set of things at the same time.
Yeah, and then above that, same thing applies to initiatives and suites.
Initiatives and suites. Yep. So yep, and then even at the portfolio level, right? You got headlines, and now you're talking about the top of the organization and trying to figure out what are the most important things that we all need to work on together. But at every level, we're using, a Kanban visualization and the Kanban metrics that help us figure out, how are we doing?
Yeah, and I haven't seen the questions come through yet, but I am pretty sure these questions are going to come through about, how did you figure out WIP limits? Were there any tooling constraints? What tool did you use?
Oh gosh, good ones.
So let's take those. How did you? What was the tooling for this multi-layer Kanban system?
Yeah, so we use Jira. what part of the change process though was getting everybody on the same instance of Jira. We actually had, gosh, I don't even remember how many we started with, and that was a lot of work. A lot of work to get people on the same instance, and then we used Actionable Agile to visualize our Kanban metrics, and yeah, both very helpful tools.
Okay, so great. So it
Mhm.
was Jira, which is pretty ubiquitous.
Pretty
Uh,
standard. Yep.
yeah, along with ADO, Jira and ADO
Hmm.
probably have 90% of the market here. Um, so great, you've got all this set up in Jira. How did you figure out? You just
Yeah.
showed us all the columns. Like, how did we figure out
Yep.
those columns? And more importantly, how did you figure out how you would limit WIP or what those columns mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say think about this. It's a long change process where we didn't figure out all the answers at any one time, for starters. But to figure out the columns, what we really did is we found the first suite area that seemed most amenable to like adopting the operating model, and we workshopped with them to think about like what work are they doing, and kind of did a board design.
Mhm.
It just said like, what would this look like to you? And then as we integrated their work into that workflow, we learned a little bit more and tweaked it. And we came up with our first set of policies about or exit criteria about those different columns. But we really kept the exit criteria really light at first. We want more like characterize the things that could happen in that space, more so than getting really, really specific about like the following 19 things must be done. But then as we moved from suite area to suite area, we also learned a lot. Like, so we rolled it out suite area by suite area. And with each one, you learn more about like, oh, right, you have a different kind of work, don't you? And how would that fit in? And how do we tweak that? Because, over a portfolio, you have some vast array of different kinds of products, different kinds of customers, and different kinds of ways of selling. And so we tweaked it as we went. And so now when it came to WIP limits, we took an approach. I actually thought this worked really well, but take it for what it's worth. We didn't even really talk about WIP limits at first. Um, Instead, we introduced the metrics. And so we just essentially, as soon as we created the boards, we just started creating the actual Agile charts that would show you work in progress, cycle time, aging, throughput. And we really just started there. We wanted the metrics to kind of serve as the motivation for doing something to make the metrics better. We knew there was a kind of an underlying desire to have better predictability and forecasting. And so it was easy enough to kind of say like, all right, so you want to forecast, here's your data. Your forecast isn't where you want it to be, right? So now what are our dials to turn? And that's when we started talking about like WIP. Like, uh, I think especially the portfolio level, it's hard to talk about WIP first because it's just not a concept everybody's comfortable really enforcing.
Mhm.
And so you almost had to build the desire for a change and then talk about like how you would make it better. So that's kind of how we went about thinking about WIP limits.
When you talk about the desire for change, was that your way of getting over any resistance that might have shown up as you were rolling this out?
I mean, it's part of it, right? Like, I mean, part of it is like you have so many different people with so many different experiences in a scaled environment, right? So like, and you don't want to discount those. People have real reasons why that things that have worked for them in the past, and we wanted people to kind of partly self-discover. And we knew that predictability and speed were motivators. Like we wanted to get better,
Mhm.
and if we could give some metrics that would show where we're at, and then start to introduce some ideas and concepts about how flow or Kanban might say you get better, then that could get the engine turning. And so it did help with some of the resistance. I don't necessarily like to call it resistance per se, but there's skepticism.
Skepticism. Yeah,
There should
yeah.
be, because these ideas are new for a lot of people. So we did that, and we combined that with a lot of Kanban training, pro Kanban training to help with that too. Because I think, and I don't know if this is true globally or not, but at the portfolio level, I think I see a lot more just project and program management than anything else. And it's hard to make the leap from managing projects that way to managing projects this way if you haven't done it before. And so
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
creating the motivation, showing the charts is a good way to start.
yeah, that's. I mean that last part there about the. It's funny how agile, even Kanban, has been kind of
Yeah,
pigeonholed into this is a team
yeah,
thing,
yeah.
and
It's
what you
delivery.
have what you have done is demonstrated that it's so much beyond just a team thing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Not just that, but I think by narrowing Kanban or Scrum or Agile in general to just a delivery team, you miss the opportunity to see your real constraints in your system.
Mhm.
And I think that's something that we were also trying to say is that, our knee-jerk reaction a lot of times, if things aren't, if we're not going as fast as we want to go, is put more developers into the system. And we wanted to be able to visualize that whole system so we could see that, is that our constraint? It's like, it's really zoom out and say, like, what if our constraint is in discovery? We're not able to get through discovery fast enough. Or what if our constraint is in dependencies with other groups like legal or marketing or whatever, or even in our release process? We don't know all the time where our real constraint is, especially when you're tracking with just hours. Like if you're estimating a project in hours and just tracking to like, did the developers burn the hours? That doesn't show you like, well, what prevented the work from getting to the system and getting to a user's hands. And so, yeah, zooming out and like really visualizing that whole thing and trying to apply it to the whole business was a real win, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you're. It's
Yeah.
interesting because you're kind of answering the questions as they're
Oh, yeah.
popping up, even. But I
Oh,
am
good.
gonna.
I don't see them.
I know I am
Okay.
going to for those folks putting in questions. I am going to come to your pointed questions once our initial conversation is done here.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely, we're gonna come back to that.
Okay.
But as those of you listening can already see, Nate's already kind of answering some of these things, but we'll get back to those. Let's talk about any challenges you faced like early on as you were
Mhm.
implementing this. Like, what were some challenges that came up? What was your approach in overcoming those?
Yeah. So I think some of the challenges originally were really like technical tooling things. Like not having everybody on one Jira instance was a major issue. It just was like it's hard to demonstrate and like put the things into action when you can't see each other's work.
Hmm.
Right. So like there were some just tactical things to get out of the way. Um, I think the next thing that was really a challenge was the mindset shift from project mindset into flow based thinking. We That was really a challenge, and honestly still is to a degree, of trying to understand how do you get through this idea of like, we need to know how many hours a thing is and how long it'll, like, when that means it'll finish. How do you flip that and talk about it in terms of probabilistic forecasting?
Hmm.
It's a tough leap. I think maybe another challenge too was like, leaders, the higher up in the business you go, often the busier people are. And it's just harder to get their attention. Um, and especially during a change when you're like, we need you to see this. And so it was a little challenging to get all of the leaders through training, not necessarily because they didn't want to, although I don't know that everybody's super excited about training all the time, but probably just scheduling and and so then that means a long tail of getting people through. And when you do that, then it's like, um, so those were some of the probably the things that stood out early. Was just like, how do we get people to understand the core concepts so that we can build on them? Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I remember that very first instance. Since we worked on some of this together,
yeah,
the challenge of having everyone on the same Jira instance.
yeah.
Let me just give Nate a huge amount of credit here because I remember there was just to demonstrate how much demand Nate had created for this. There was one team that was working in a separate instance,
Yeah.
which did not have the actionable agile and portfolio forecaster and those things
Oh yeah,
that they other things. They started they started duplicating their work in the
they did.
instance
Yeah.
that had it because
Uh-huh.
their transfer was taking too long,
Yep.
so that they had all the statistics, so that they had all the data
Yeah.
available to run through it. That's
Yeah, it's
pretty
pretty
cool.
fascinating.
Yeah.
And actually, I think that goes back to the training a little bit too. The leaders who went through the training tended to latch onto the concepts a lot faster.
Hmm.
And so then they did things like that, like,
Yeah.
oh, we see where we're going, let's make it happen. And so I think it's just another call out of like,
Yeah.
training
Uh,
isn't maybe the most exciting thing or sexy thing all the time, but like it mattered in this case.
yeah, it's just amazing. It's just
Mhm.
I'm still fascinated by the fact that they decided that they would rather on a daily basis do double the work
Just sync it up. Yeah.
than and that was less painful to
Yeah.
them than doing the big reporting stuff because the reporting was
Right.
already
And
done for
then,
them.
yeah, when you've decided you need to work together and you can't, and you see what it's costing you, like you're willing to do a lot of different things sometimes to make it work. And that's what they did.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Um, was there were there things that people had to unlearn as you roll this out? Was there a lot of stuff that they had to kind of leave that baggage behind?
Yeah. There always is that kind of stuff and change like this. But it varied greatly across the groups in terms of like what they were leaving behind
Mm,
or what they were needing to just learn through. Some of it was really common stuff, like they didn't really understand what Kanban was or what flow really was, or they had used Scrum or some version of Scrum in the past, and they weren't sure how does velocity map over to what we're doing today, or where does sprint planning fit in this whole thing. So there's some of those transitions. The bigger ones really were where we had teams that were working in a more um, like don't want to say waterfall method, but a much more upfront planful approach than others. And so that was a bigger change for some of them to think about, like processes that they had tuned for a decade or more,
mhm,
and we were asking them to say, like, I know they worked for you for what got you here, and we should thank it for that and be grateful for what it was, and we need to together do something new and different. And like I said, I don't think there was as much resistance as much as but there is like a realization that you have to come to of like, oh yeah, what got me here will get me there type thing. And each of the groups had to come to terms with that in their own way.
yeah. Cool.
Mhm.
Um, all right. So we've talked a good deal about challenges, about how you went about implementing this.
Yeah.
Let's talk about let's move into more about impact and results of this.
So
Um, what was what was the first like noticeable things you started seeing
mhm.
that started coming through after Kanban flow, whatever you want to call it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Probably the very first thing we saw, and I think actually you saw some of this too, was um, individual teams started using aging in their daily work,
Mhm.
um, and seeing it as really powerful. And so you can see a light bulb going on. And that was one of the first things. It's not huge, maybe across the portfolio from a portfolio level perspective, but each of the teams doing that like started to help
Mhm.
because it got them focused on cycle time. And so that was a big change. But I think um, the biggest change related to why we went into this was product and tech working together. And so part of the reason we had these two in a box is like we needed product and tech to start thinking of themselves as a partnership, and we needed them to help us design the system together. And so that was another big one. And so again, not necessarily Kanban related, but it was really important because what we had is those leaders were trying to fix these things on their own and not really coming together to fix them together. And this gave them like a focal point for that. And then the last thing is like, and this is true for all Kanban work I've done, is like this realization of how much work we really have in progress, and the coming to terms with how long it's taking us to get it through the system. And so that was a big one, because it gave us some of those conversations about like, oh, like I know we have like 50 new ideas, but like realistically, these ideas aren't going to get finished, so these don't matter as much right now. And so that was kind of big. Um, let's see what else. Um, I think we also were able to combine a couple of things that see some things that we weren't able to see before, which is in our old system, tech tended to have their own list of work and product tended to have their list of like product feature work. And we
Yeah.
decided to cram those together in one list. And pretty much immediately at the headline level, so like all the way at the portfolio level, we saw at least one thing, actually got a couple, that together tech and product could look at that list and be like, that's the most important thing we need to do right now. And some of them were tech thing, like what you might call a tech thing, right? So like a replatforming or a system stability sort of a thing. And we had, one of those that we all realized together, like that needs to be our most important thing until it's done, because it has
Mhm.
a date that really, like, it's not we didn't set a date. It's like it's just going to happen, and we got to be ready. And this let us stay focused on that together, instead of, in the old system, you probably would have seen tech trying to manage it on off the side of their desk, and you would
Right.
have seen product going like, why is nobody working on my features? And this way they could both see it together and be like, yes, even if that delays product features, we got to do that right now. So
Yeah, almost everything that you've mentioned kind of seemed to center around that last thing you said, which is focus. Like
yeah,
aging brings focus, bringing these
yeah,
these backlogs together brings focus, limiting that whip brings focus, and and as you mentioned, that focus seemed to translate into a people change as well, like people
yeah,
working together a lot
for
more.
sure, for sure,
The,
for sure. And honestly, like, that's such a big part of this. It goes unsaid a lot of times, honestly, but like, people should be able to work together without it being friction all the time. And a lot of times our systems are kind of set up to like make it hard to not have friction. And yeah, this cut through some of it, not all of it. The
yeah.
work is hard, but it definitely was helpful.
But could you kind of come up with like one particular example, that a specific example of how this improvement worked? So
So you want to talk about the one I just mentioned about the tech item?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh,
What you think
right.
of?
That's yeah. That. I guess that is a pretty specific example. Yeah, how that
Yeah,
how that
and it
goes
was,
through.
well, it's a big one. And I would say, we could probably think of some others here off the top of my head, but so one of the here's another one. So we, because these businesses just come together, we were building out this portfolio thing for the first time, right? So there's conversations and work management that didn't exist, that needed to exist. And so we started a regular planning meeting with our top leaders, and we brought the headline board into that conversation. And um, and we brought our headline level metrics, like we brought in our cycle time and our WIP and all that kind of stuff for those things. And we had conversations about what to do about it. And one of the things that happened is, coming out of those meetings, we started to narrow in on, like, sure, we have all this stuff in our system, but if there were three things we want our folks to really focus on over the next 6 to 8 weeks, like, these are probably them. And here's the specific things we need to do as to why. And so that conversation led it then to, like, being able to turn to all of those sweet area leads and suite leads and say, you know, if it helps, here's the thing you really, really have to focus on right now. And that was another one of those things where, like, there's a few features, a few product changes that we needed everybody working on at the same time to get it done. And if one group is working on it now and another group is working on it next quarter, it takes forever to get it through your system. And by saying, like, okay, no, we're going to look at all the work, really narrow the focus to like two or three things, and then make sure those really, really get done. And we had a couple of good examples in the product space, where, yeah, we had a thing, we knew we needed to do it, but we probably weren't creating enough, not just focus, but like synchronized focus across the whole portfolio on getting this done, because it required work from all the suites.
Hmm.
And so yeah, that was a big one.
Yo, what's I mean, I'm gonna put words in your mouth, because
Go ahead.
what that really,
Yeah,
as I hear that, what that translates to me is that headline board. The headlines are essentially your expression of strategy.
yeah,
Over
you
the
can say
next
that.
few months, this is our strategy, and you have
Mhm.
directly connected strategy to the
Yeah,
work that the people on the teams are doing. You've created a
yeah,
pipe connecting all
yeah.
of them.
I like the way you said that, because that was one of the original things that we went into saying. I don't know if we explicitly said this was one of the pain points, but it's one of the things that I brought up at the beginning, of this whole effort, was we spend a lot of time on strategy, but activating strategy in the way we're organized and working right now isn't really happening. Or to make it happen, it's heroic efforts of individuals to try to figure out how to make the pieces fit. And we need to make that our natural way of working. And yeah, you're right. Like, headlines were an expression of, here are the bits and pieces of that we need to cooperate on together.
Mhm.
And yeah, it ended up being a great way to make sure that the things we wanted to do actually got done, and we could see progress, and we could see the status, so much of them, without having to go out and say like, hey, is this green, yellow, or red? Which I think, I don't know, I've been doing this a long time, and I've, there's these predictable patterns where like the higher up you go, the nicer the picture seems to be when the statuses elevate to you. um, and what this led us to do is, like, you could just see the actual flow. You could see whether it had moved or not, and you could see the aging. You could say like, okay, that should have been done, that's supposed to be done this quarter, is it going to be? Doesn't look like it. And it gives you a chance to do something about it. So
So, and that's I mean, you're kind of yeah, it's almost like that predictability and focus both became a
yeah.
natural side effect of doing this stuff.
Yeah. Yep. It's getting there. And it's a process. I think the bigger chunks of work you have, is like you start working at a portfolio level and you're talking about quarter size chunks of functionality, your cycle time for improving your throughput is longer too, right?
Right.
So like on a team, if you can complete stuff in a couple of weeks, you can improve pretty fast. When you're only really completing stuff every quarter or two at a big chunk level, it takes longer, I think, to see those metrics improve.
Mhm.
Um, but we're getting there.
Awesome. Um, so just pulling forward from that, right? It
Mhm.
has implementing these flow principles, these Kanban principles, has it like changed the speed to market, customer satisfaction, efficiency? What are some what are some results that your customers might be seeing um,
Yeah.
based on this?
Yeah. I don't know for sure, to be honest with you. I don't know
Hmm.
that I have customer side metrics on this yet. Um, Especially not directly linked to this effort, I would say. But the things we are seeing for sure is the ability to complete work that matters. And I think over time we'll definitely see that showing up as like, okay, now customers are actually feeling this. I don't
Right.
think enough of it has made it through the system at this point to say like, here's 9 things that customers recognized. But yeah,
Yeah.
that I think,
It's almost like we've gotten to the point that we are getting the stuff we said done,
yeah. And now
but
it's like, and does that
yeah,
really turn the dial on the customer side?
right. Was that the
I
right
think,
stuff to do? Yeah.
yeah, I think from the internal perspective, like I think leaders say we were able to have better conversations about what to do. We're able to get the things done that we need to get done. We're able to steer the ship. And so now it's like, probably there'll be some like, okay, validating that those things that are hitting the market are moving the needle. And that will probably inform the discovery process earlier on. And like, we need to do different things to discover the right next things. So
Yep. Yep. Great. Yeah. The whole feedback loop is actually explicit now rather than
yeah,
that
for sure.
implicit. Yeah.
For sure.
Let's slightly retrospective at this
Yeah.
point, if that is a word.
Yeah, let's
What
do it.
would you what would you do differently?
Yeah.
If you were starting this over today.
Yeah, there's a couple things for sure. There's probably 1,000 things, to be honest with you. And some things you don't know if doing it differently would have been worse or better. But one thing that's I think we tried to do is we tried to leave a lot of the details undefined so that teams could figure it out in their
Mhm.
own way. And in principle, I liked that. And in practice, I think it caused more confusion than helpful. So I think I would go in with a much more prescriptive approach to how they would do the work of the systems. Like,
Mhm.
what kind of meetings would you have, and how would you go about breaking up work, and some things like that. Probably things that go into a working agreement. I'd probably bring that forward a lot sooner. A more detailed working agreement that describes who's doing what, when, and that kind of thing. Because I think that was hard for people to get through when they were trying to process flow and also
Mhm.
try to figure out how to make it happen. So I'd be more opinionated about that. And then I know I've said training a few times, but you know, we really struggle to figure out the right people to put in the right training of the right sort, because it's a big time investment, it's a money investment. Looking back on it, though, I would have been um, much more opinionated on who needed to take what and make sure they actually took all of it. And that's hard. It's hard because schedules are hard and people are busy, but it just made such a difference for the people who did take it versus didn't that I think I'd be more opinionated about that going in.
Yeah, it's I mean, I since I know you, your natural
Yeah,
coaching stance is here's the general idea, go fill it
yeah,
in,
yeah,
and which I appreciate too. But maybe I remember someone saying that people are better editors than
yeah,
writers, so maybe
yeah,
giving them a thing to say, go edit this.
yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. For sure. And it's those things we're starting to do some of those things even now. It's like being, here's a template you might use for working agreements, and it's really well received. And I'm thinking
Mhm.
like, yeah, we probably should have done that
That's awesome.
earlier.
Well,
Yeah.
I guess that's the whole point of Kanban. You try something and find out if it works.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
part of it. Yeah.
uh, well, I want to. I kind of want to jump ahead a little bit because
Yeah.
I want to leave good amount of time for
Sure.
questions here, because there's some interesting questions coming through, and others listening, watching, please put in some questions for Nate. If you were to summarize this whole thing in a
Mhm.
couple of sentences, how would you summarize your entire journey of these organizations coming together and implementing this
Mm.
large scale Kanban thing?
Oh,
Yeah.
um, wow, that's a good question. Probably something like it doesn't have to be this hard. uh, right. So like it's it is hard. The thing is like it's not like there's no way to make portfolio level product development easy.
Mhm.
But it should be possible and it shouldn't drive you crazy and you shouldn't be tripping over the easy stuff. And so like I think that's what I mean by that. It's like it doesn't have to be this hard.
Um, at least last question from me. How has this way of working, this flow Kanban waste way of working, changed how you think about priorities and delivering
Mm.
value and efficiency? Like, I mean, you've been doing this for a bit. How has that changed that understanding for you?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like I've been using Kanban for so long that like I think going back to what I said at the beginning about systems thinking and flow theory and some lean theory, like when you get a hang of like what that really means, you can't not see it everywhere. And it doesn't mean you have to be dogmatic or highly theoretical. I think that's actually the art of it, is like how do you take the highly theoretical pieces and bring the pieces that matter practically into a situation to make results. But like it's hard to look around and not see ways to really make organizations better by
Mhm.
applying just some of these basic principles that help just expose things that they've never seen or new ways of thinking about it. And so I think that's probably what's I've taken from the last years is like, wow, there's a lot of low hanging fruit that by applying a different like model or perspective, all of a sudden you're like, oh wow, we could do a lot better by changing this thing.
Yeah, I mean it's simple but not necessarily easy.
Yeah,
But
that's a good way
yeah,
to put it. Yeah, yeah,
but
for sure.
you don't have to make your life any. It's never going to be easy, but you don't have to make your life
No.
harder by doing the complex thing.
Yeah, yeah. What do they say? Make the easy things easy and the hard things possible.
Yep.
That's what we're shooting for.
I have a list of questions that have been popping in, so
All right. Yeah,
we'll just
let's
try to run through this. First one, McKenna asks. I hope I am pronouncing your name correctly. I apologize if I don't. How did you get all your teams to a baseline level of Kanban maturity for this
uh,
approach?
yeah, that's a great question. So the entire first phase of this rollout we called foundational, and foundational was a combination of training. So we had people going through Pro Kanban, especially APK stuff, but we also did the metrics course and the scaling course. So like, we were investing in the vocabulary and the concepts in particular, for those two in a box leaders that I mentioned. We didn't necessarily want to train everybody, but we focused on those. And so I think that was a big part of getting people up to speed on it. And then the next thing we did is we actually had like hands-on approach where we walked through the transition with them. So it's one thing to teach them the concepts, and another thing to say, like, how do you bring this into your daily life? And so we kind of walked through that with them in hands-on coaching, and that kind of thing. And I think that's where you answer a lot of the more like concrete questions about how it shows up in their day to day. And then the other thing we did is, like, we did a lot of just lean coffees, where we said every week, anybody who's part of this and is struggling with something or has a topic you want to cover. And I got to tell you, I did not think they would be that popular. It was somebody else in our team, it was their idea, and they still to this day, we have them and they're engaging conversations about what's going on inside the model. So I think that also helped just work through the mechanics of things.
That's amazing. It's like both training and active support as people try to get through this. It's awesome.
Yep.
Next one. This comes from Steve. How did you get everyone to buy into this?
Well, we focused on pain points, I think is probably the way to start. Like, we really did focus a lot on, look, we all know we have to work together, and we all know we're not working together very well. And we know there's not a lot of visibility into some of these things. So let's focus really, really on improving that. And then I think it also helped that we were not dogmatic about it. We weren't like, we're doing a giant like safe rollout or a Kanban rollout. Like, we didn't really talk about it that way. We talked about it as like, we're implementing some basic structures that we need to work together. And it didn't mean that everybody bought in as soon as they saw it. There's skepticism that's valid, and there's even some that are like, I don't think this will work. And for those folks, took the general approach of like, look, we're not going to force it down your throat, but we're going to like walk you through it. And if you have concerns, we're going to talk through them. And it helped, and I would say for the most part in this organization, I don't think there's a ton of like absolute resistance of like, we won't do it. It was more just like, show me how it works in this state. And so we did a lot of explaining, and that was helpful.
The next one is a longish question, so I'm going to read this out, and then if you need me to repeat any parts of this. How did you sell this approach to senior management? It sounds like you basically started small and expanded out. Were senior management looking at this as a transformation exercise? My experience is that people expect a detailed transformation roadmap, whereas you started small. Love to hear how you secure senior management buy-in and how you carry.
So I'll start by saying hats off to, it's a great question because I've experienced this too. Hats off to the management at this particular organization. The CPO and the head of product, like, they knew we had to fix something, right? They knew they didn't have the dials that they needed to turn or the levers to pull to do what we needed to do. And so they were bought into that. And they also didn't want a major transformation. And so I could show up and say, we can do this without a whole like complete like transformation effort. And not that it wouldn't be a lot of work, but like, we wouldn't necessarily need to call it a giant transformation. And so, but even at that level, we sold it small, right? So the first things were just, let's talk to the senior leaders about how we could make work visible and the benefits of doing it, and then let's do it. And once they started to see what we were talking about, it was easy to justify the next thing. And so in this particular case, we didn't take this approach of like, write out the whole roadmap, come to some senior leader meeting and sell the whole roadmap. We sold, hey, we can work on making these problems better, and the next step will look like this. And hats off to these leaders that they were like, that makes sense. For the most part, there was like a lot of a buy-in even very early to do it. And so I don't have like a fancy way we brought them along per se, because they really did lean in and kind of spearhead this, which is maybe different for a lot of you, but definitely different for me and the transformations I've been a part of. Having senior leaders on board like that was rare.
Yeah, it's almost like you were agile about the transformation itself.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Hey, we're gonna only solve these problems. That's all we're doing right now. And if they get solved, then we'll go to the next stage.
Yeah, and not every leadership team would be okay with that, but we had some experience. That's how we built products, and so it wasn't too much of a stretch to do it that way.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, again, centering on, I think you said this early on, and I don't want it to be missed, is centering on the pain points.
Pain points. Yep.
Let's solve these 2 pain points right now. Then we
Mhm.
can solve the other pain points.
Yeah, for sure.
Kind of cool that then you didn't have to package this as here is a big solution that solves all your pain
Yeah.
points.
Yeah, and then there was, as we got started, and you start trying to justify spending money on training and consulting and stuff, you do get more questions about, well, wait a second, like, what are we getting out of this, and what does that roadmap look like? And we took an agile approach to that. I think is we sketched out roughly what was going to happen and the benefits, and we broke it up into phases, and it made it relatively easy to go along with, and plus we were seeing results pretty early. In terms of people working together better. So
Great. I want to move on to the next question here.
all right.
Back to McKenna here. Estimation, capacity planning, story points, and hours tracking.
Yeah.
What did you find that worked best with this model?
Oh, geez. Okay. So what we did is we tried to keep the model itself as agnostic to these kinds of approaches as possible. So all we required in the model that we were using is to right size those different levels of breakdown. And by right sizing, we just said your epics, you need to believe that they're probably less than a month, initiatives less than a quarter, and headlines less than a quarter. And that's all we required. It's like, if you're going to participate in this model, you have to do that. So that's almost like your service level expectation in a Kanban level speak of like, you're looking at your cycle time scatter plot. You're going to want to say like, are we hitting, this level of cycle time? However, tons of teams with different things they were doing to size their work. Some of them really believed strongly that they needed to continue to estimate in hours for a host of reasons. And what we said was like, you're welcome to do that. Like, if that adds value to you, you're welcome to do it. We'll add that to your working agreements, but we're not going to make everybody do it. And if you decide after like seeing how these flow metrics work that you no longer need that, you can get rid of it. And some of the teams did get rid of it. Some of the teams were like, oh yeah, we don't need to do that anymore. But there's a few other teams that they do work directly with like contracting work with a customer. And when you do that, you're in a different situation than in like a normal product development team. You're almost like you're finding a contract for a fixed scope of work and that kind of stuff. And they felt like to be responsible, you need to provide that kind of more detailed level estimate. And we said, yeah, if that fits your work, you should totally do that. So that's how we did it. We didn't teach anybody about story card sizing or Fibonacci or planning poker or anything like that. We basically just said, let's keep it as simple as possible, and then just use your metrics. For most teams, setting a service level expectation for a card type and then checking to see whether you're hitting it is plenty to give you an idea of are we sizing our work well. And then we paired that with forecasting. So we did use the portfolio forecaster and Actual Agile and some Monte Carlo pieces of Actual Agile. And that was how we started teaching people to generate probabilistic forecasts. Is they're like, we probably will be here. Here's the certainty level. And we encourage that as the primary way to plan, right? So we did decide to put due dates on some of these different levels of breakdown. And the due dates, what we called them was, this is our desired due date, not our actual due date. So we'd say like, if there really is a date that you need to say, put it on the epic, put it on the initiative. But it's our planned date, not our actual date. And so then we'd use our forecasting tools to tell us how likely it was we would hit that date, given the current priorities. And that tended to drive better conversations. And so in all honesty, we're still learning to use the forecaster. That's almost like the pinnacle of setting all this up, is that you can finally use some more complex modeling. But what the benefit is, like, if you haven't used that, one of the benefits to this is there's so much work that goes into sizing cards and to tracking velocities and for deciding how many sprints out you can plan. These tools almost give it to you for free. And all you have to do is like, is it smaller than like a pretty big chunk of work? And you can take all that time and invest it in something more valuable than in deciding whether a card's a 5 or an 8.
Yeah.
Does that strike a chord fatigue?
No, well, I will not get on that soapbox.
Yeah.
All right, cool. At least the last question, at least on the
Yeah.
list so far, if one pops up
Mhm.
after this, we might have time for one more, is how did the existing organization structure, the org chart, help or hinder adopting this model?
Yeah. So it's a great question. So to a degree, it was helpful in that we already had, roughly speaking, when you looked at the org chart, you could kind of see these suite area leaders in place. It's like, they're VPs and directors, but you can kind of see like they already have the scope of influence or the scope of accountability that fit them into a suite area. So I'd say it helped us a little bit like that. I think um, where org charts hurt is when you're trying to be dynamic about what team members go where and trying to keep them reporting to the right manager while also being connected to the right work when the work is changing and they need to move around a little bit. So say maybe it held us back a little bit there. But we try to really emphasize throughout that, like, this is not about the org chart. This is just about how we organize around our work, and we're going to have to do this no matter how you report, either functionally or cross-functionally, whatever. We still have to organize around our work in some way. And so yeah, there's pieces that were maybe harder, but pieces that helped.
Yeah, there's one point that as you were saying that just popped in my head,
Yeah.
which I'm glad it did, because we would have been ashamed to have left this call without saying this. You did not go out and hire new people to manage these
Oh yeah.
boards, these
Oh
systems.
yes. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's true.
the responsibility was given to the existing leaders.
That's right. That's right. Yep. Yeah, we should have said that. Yeah, we didn't hire any people for this. This was just redefining how the existing people organized around their work and making sure they knew what role they fit in. Yeah.
Yeah. Because yeah, it's
Yeah.
just another advantage of doing this step by step. You can just kind of fold it
Yeah.
in nicely into the
Fold it in.
existing
Yeah.
structure.
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah, Nate,
okay.
any last words from you on this
Yeah.
topic for today?
Yeah, for sure. So one thing I'd like to say is, like, while I'm here talking about it, this was a lot of people who did this work. And so, yeah, I'm thankful for the people who were part of this. Pratik, you were one of them. Pratik and Daniel Bacanti helped us out a lot. Stacy Martin helped us out on the flow stuff. Matt Barcombe was helping us out on some of the product pieces. Um, you know, People inside the organization. My partner in crime, Adam Bland, he and I kind of spearheaded this at the beginning. He was my engineering partner in the first steps of this thing. So just, when you are getting into these, it takes a lot of people to come up with something that works and to make it work. And so yeah, I'm just shout out to all those folks who were part of this, and for everybody who just leaned in and tried to learn and make it work in their own spaces. It's not easy to change while you have a day job. You're trying to do real work and change at the same time. So
You might have just answered this question, but I'm going to try to sneak
yeah.
one more question in.
All right, go for it.
What's the elevator pitch for this?
Oh, elevator pitch. So we can deliver better, more valuable products faster if we leverage flow concepts at each level of an organization, and it works at all levels.
There you have it, folks.
It's off the cuff. It's close.
Yeah, it's perfectly done off the cuff. Thank you, Nate, for joining us today, and thank you everyone out there for joining us today for this episode of Beyond the Board. We hope you found this this practical, applicable, inspirational, and of course, reach out to. I'm gonna throw you on the bus, Nate.
Yeah, sure.
Find Nate on LinkedIn.
Oh, yeah. Please.
Reach out to him if you need more of this. Next in our next episode, which is next month. We haven't found a date yet. We'll be talking to my old boss, Steve Reed, who's going to talk about another scaled implementation of Kanban, just similar to what Nate just talked about. We kind of keep hitting this. This Kanban works at every level and gives you benefits at every level. A theme, you definitely won't want to miss it. If you have a story of how Kanban has helped your organization achieve something extraordinary, we'd love to hear from you. Please reach out to us to Colleen Johnson or to myself or to Maria, and we'll try to get you on. If you are one of those people who are looking to implement some of this, reach out to us as well. ProKanban has the ProKanban Efficiency Lab that is designed to do just this. Visit us at prokanban.org/lab to learn more. And once again, finally, thank you, Nate. Nate, do you have a class coming up?
I do have a class coming up. So yeah, if
Yeah.
anybody wants to take a Kanban training class, I have one coming up at the end of April. So yeah, sign up. There's no early bird, I think, on it so far. So
lovely. Yeah,
so
if you go to the prokanban.org website and look for applying professional Kanban under classes, you will find Nate's class listed for the end of April.
Yep, it's going to be fun.
That's all we had for today. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Nate, again.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.